South Carolina Part 1. South Carolina and the Economics of Independence. Welcome back to Civic Math. Last time, we visited Rhode Island and explored what I call the mathematics of the sea. We discovered how one of the America's smallest colonies became larger than its borders through ships, trade routes, ocean travel, and Atlantic commerce. Rhode Island's story was a story of movement: ships arriving, ships departing, cargo crossing oceans, ideas crossing oceans. Today, however, we travel nearly 1,000 miles south to a very different colony, that is, South Carolina. If Rhode Island was one of the smallest colonies, South Carolina was one of the wealthiest. Its economy produced enormous amounts of valuable exports. Its merchants traded across the Atlantic. Its plantations generated fortunes, and its largest city, Charleston, became one of the most important ports in British America. But that wealth created a problem because when revolution began, South Carolina had more to lose than most colonies. Today, we are going to examine South Carolina through the mathematics of population, trade, wealth, export, and risk. Because one of the most fascinating questions of the American Revolution is this: why would one of the richest colonies in America risk everything? Let's take a closer look. We are going to examine South Carolina through sections, section 1 through section 5. In section 1, we are going to cover population, math. Okay? As always, let's look at who is where and how many. So, South Carolina in 1776 had a population of roughly 220,000 people, of which 120,000 were white and 100,000 were blacks. Okay, if we do the ratio, we're looking at about 100,000 divided by 120, we're looking at about 45%. So nearly half of South Carolina's population was enslaved. That made South Carolina very different from many other colonies. Now, one would ask, if almost half of a colony's population is enslaved, how might that affect political decisions, economic decisions, and revolutionary decisions? This is one of the most important demographic calculations in colonial America. So that was section 1. So section 2, we are going to look into Charleston math. Okay. Again, major cities in colonial America in 1776 were, okay, Philadelphia, about 40,000 people. New York, roughly 25,000 people. Boston, roughly 16,000 people. And Charleston, roughly 12,000 people. How can a city of only 12,000 people become one of the most important ports in America? Now, population does not necessarily equal to importance. Okay. Charleston was certainly smaller than several northern cities, but importance is not measured only by population. So importance is measured through trade, it's measured through export, is measured through economic influence. But most importantly, trade. So trade was the key to South Carolina's success and most importantly to Charleston's success. Okay. In section 3, let's look at the rice math. Okay. Rice consumed almost everywhere. Okay. On the eve of the American Revolution, let's say 1768 to 1772, the Carolinas produce on average 66 million pounds of rice per year. Okay, so 66 million pounds, let's convert that into tons. So 66 million divided by 2,000, that gives us roughly 33,000 tons of rice every year. Okay, so 33,000 tons. Let's come back. Okay, if you produce all this, it has to be sent somewhere, and primarily this was sent. It was exported. So exported outside of colonial America. So 33,000 tons. Okay, if we divide it by 150, which is the average that a vessel can carry. So we're looking at about 220 shiploads. So 220 shiploads of rice every year. Now, what happens to a colony when war threatens more than 200 shiploads of exports? That's some serious question that need to be answered. But South Carolina still risked this. Okay. Next, let's examine the second most important export of South Carolina at the time, which is indigo. What is it? So indigo math. Okay. Indigo is a blue dye. Okay. Now, before synthetic dyes were invented, people could not simply go to a store and buy blue coloring. Blue dye had to come from nature. One of the best natural sources was a plant called indigo. So, indigo was transformed to blue dye and then put on the clothing. Now, if you own blue clothing in the 1700s, there is a good chance that indigo was involved somewhere in the manufacturing process. What is the practical use for indigo? Okay, it is used, of course, in clothing, naturally military uniforms, work clothes, textile, and fabrics. Okay, Britain had a growing textile industry. Textile manufacturers needed enormous amounts of blue dye. The more cloth Britain produced, the more indigo it needed. So textile produced textile was one of the best use of for indigo. Now, what quantity of indigo was produced in South Carolina around that time, around 1776? So South Carolina produced around 1776 1,122,000 roughly pounds of indigo that was exported. So if we convert the pounds to again to tons to have a better graph, so 101.122 million divided by 2,000 roughly gave us 561 tons. So 561 tons of blue dyes was exported annually every year to outside of the colony, South Carolina. So if indigo weighed much less than rice, why was it so important? Okay. Rice is food. Indigo is dye. Okay. Rice was valuable because people ate it. Indigo was valuable because people wore it. So rice, 65% of export value. Indigo, about 27% of export value. So combine 65 plus 27, we're looking at about 92% of the entire colony's export was rice or indigo based. So two products generated roughly 92% of South Carolina export economy. That was serious. Imagine if two industries produce more than 90% of your state's economy today. If those industries disappear, the entire economy will be gone. That helps us understand why the decision to support independence was such a gamble for South Carolina. Okay. Section 5, the risk math of revolution. South Carolina in 1776 had two choices. Option 1, okay, remain loyal. Trade continues. Wealth protected. Okay. Option 2, support independence. War possible. Future unknown. Which option would you choose if your family's wealth depended on trade? Very difficult to answer. This is what made South Carolina's decision so remarkable. Many colonies were risking something. South Carolina was risking enormous wealth, and yet its leaders chose independence.